Andre Bailey, founder of Project Opioid, here with Brad Rex, President, CEO. Brad, what title are you going by these days?
President and CEO of eHome Counseling Group.
eHome Counseling Group, which is one of these new fancy online video counseling services that you helped start and now has been very busy, I think, over the last few months. But Brad is one of the leaders of Project Opioid, a initiative that we do here in Central Florida and that we're expanding around Florida and around America on the opioid crisis. Brad, you've been a great partner, and Project Opioid was started really with this idea that the opioid crisis was insane. There was so many people dying. 2019, another historic year of overdoses of people, consuming opioids, being addicted to them, and overdosing and dying. And now in 2020, with the COVID-19 pandemic, this historic lockdown of people in their homes that we did to flatten the curve, we feel like there could be more people than ever that could be vulnerable to substance abuse, mental health issues, and ultimately opioid usage and overdose. What are you seeing at eHome Counseling?
Well, it's really interesting, Andre. We're seeing almost 100% increase in contacts, people reaching out to us with mental distress. And it just continues to grow and grow, particularly as you say, as the longer we're in quarantine, it becomes more and more significant. So there is a huge psychological impact to this pandemic that I think is not really getting the publicity as much as the medical and physical side, but it is absolutely impacting people immensely right now.
Yeah, the idea of locking down millions of Americans, and we did it in societies around the world, it's never been done before. So humans, we love regularity. We love things that are day by day the same. And so to take away our jobs, take away our activities, our recreation, and say, everybody stay home. It was important, I think, that we did it, but I'm not sure we know what's going to be on the other side of that when it comes to both the economics, which we can't fix here today on the show, but the mental health aspects. How many people are going to be impacted by these lockdowns? And Brad, what are these people going to need from a mental health standpoint in the weeks and months to come?
Well, it's a little bit like the physical situation. When Dr. Fauci and others first started to talk about it, they said, we know it's going to be big, we just don't know how big. And we certainly know on the psychological side, we know it's going to be big. We really don't know how big, but some of the initial indications are out there. So, for example, the Kaiser Family Foundation surveyed Americans. Now, this was back in early April, so not even when we were really through a lot of what we've been through. And they found 45% of Americans said that the pandemic has impacted their mental health, 19% of them severely. And,
wow.
and then you look at drugs, for example, anti-anxiety drugs up 34%, and prescriptions, similarly with antidepressants, anti-insomnia drugs. So we're seeing a lot of the indications right now, which really are the leading indicators of what we're going to see afterwards. You mentioned substance use disorder. People who have substance use disorder are particularly impacted by this in a number of ways. Number one, with substance use disorder, particularly opioid use disorder, you have a compromised respiratory system. Well, what they found with COVID-19, it's a respiratory disease. And if you're already compromised, you have 3 times the death rate
for someone
who has normal breathing capabilities.
Wow.
So right there, an opioid user is at risk. But then you add on top of that, a lot of folks that have substance use disorder have housing insecurity, have food insecurity, don't have access to medical care. In some cases, their normal drug dealer is off the streets. Now you might say, oh, that's a good thing. Well, actually, what happens, somebody else comes in and takes their place and is giving them adulterated drugs that's causing them to overdose and die. And once again, you think about emergency response right now, clearly people with COVID get the priority. And so this is a very huge issue. Many people are self-medicating with alcohol and drugs because of the stress they're facing due to the pandemic. And that's just going to lead to more usage in the future. So it's something we really have to stay on top of. And I would submit, we talk about the physical impact, the deaths, we talk about the economic impact, and we're trying to kind of balance those two things out. Well, I would add a third, which is the psychological impact. And how do we balance all three? And we need to for the long-term health of our population.
Brad, why do you think we struggle so much as a society to talk about the psychological impact on us as individuals, mental health issues? As soon as you start talking about mental health, half the audience out there is like, oh, that doesn't apply to me. Or, deep down, they might be thinking this is not a topic that that people should take seriously. Why as a society are we so scared to talk about mental health and our own personal psychological needs? It's profound why that we're afraid of these topics.
Well, I think there still, unfortunately, is a stigma around mental health. And people, if you have a physical health issue, people certainly understand it and they want to help. But when you say you have a mental health issue, people may tend to shy away from that.
Just part of our culture.
And yes, I think it's getting a lot better. In particular, a lot more people accepting of, hey, your brain needs coaching just like your body does. And so getting mental health counseling is no different than getting help for any kind of physical issue. So I think people are becoming more accepting, but there still is clearly that element out there of people who believe, well, if you just change your behavior, it'll go away. If you just, ignore it, it'll go away, and don't want to really come to grips with it. The sad thing is that if you identify mental illness early, it's just like any other disease. The earlier you identify it and get it treated, the easier it is to treat and the better the outcomes. So in delaying that, you're just making it a lot worse. And in particular, when it comes to addiction and things like that. Many people evidence mental illness in their youth and in those teenage years. And, a lot of parents dismiss it and say, well, that's just being a teenager. They're moody, they're depressed, they're anxious. But really, it's indications of mental health issue. If you could treat it then, it's much easier to treat, and it prevents that child from going down a path that may involve addiction or may involve much more serious conditions later on. So we need to identify it earlier. We need to treat it earlier. And one of the messages I would give people out there listening to this is, if you're in mental distress right now because of the pandemic, ask for help. Reach out. One of the things our company does is we use metrics-based treatment, which means that we assess everybody who comes into our program. So with a simple online 5-minute assessment, we can tell you if you've got a mental health issue. And you should do that. And then in 22% of the cases, people don't. Okay, it's kind of like you have a normal blood test. But in 50% of the cases, people do. And in those cases, we can help them and keep it from getting a lot worse.
It seems like, Brad, now more than ever, this is a conversation we have to have, again, because of the mental health and societal after effects of COVID-19, the lockdowns, the economic challenges that, unfortunately, I think are just starting for us as a society. It's pretty proven that when economics go bad in our society or in someone's personal life, that's going to be a big driver of anxiety and depression and all the other underlying causes of substance abuse. Should people be especially mindful of their mental health right now? Is this a moment where people should take this more seriously than ever?
Oh, absolutely. Again, the stress that people are facing right now, there's 4 triggers of stress. In the current environment, all 4 are active. So it's not just
What are those
one.
for?
Well, so it's, for example, uncertainty and lack of control and things like that. And we're feeling all those right
Gotcha.
now. And so for people that don't typically or are prone to a mental illness, they may become prone to it. For those who may have a mental illness, it's magnified. And so, once again, we need to be taking care of ourselves. And there's a lot of things you can do, even short of seeing a counselor. You can reduce your stress, go out for a walk, exercise, help someone else out. But one thing I would tell people, it's kind of like if you remember going on an airplane, okay, in the safety briefing, they would say, put on your own oxygen mask before you put on somebody else's. Well, I would tell people, take care of your own mental health first, because if you don't, you can't take care of your family and your employees and everyone else around you. And so do some of these techniques that will help you to reduce your stress. And then once again, if you feel like you're in distress, please, reach out and get help from a professional counselor.
Our society, Brad, has had a lot of iterations of just say no type conversations when it comes to drugs and alcohol. I mean, we passed a constitutional amendment banning alcohol about 100 years ago. That didn't work out so well. Again, it seems like we struggle to hold two thoughts in our head at the same time concurrently as a society when it comes to substances. There are some out there that would say no alcohol, stay away from everything bad for you, that could be bad for you. And there are others who refuse to even have a conversation about, they hear us talk about, be careful how many drinks you have at night. Those people are just moralists trying to, tell me to do something with my life that I may or may not want to do. But it seems like this, again, is an important moment to talk about what we're putting in our bodies, how it impacts not just our body, but our psychology and our mental health. And alcohol is one of those parts of our society that is just wild how we don't really have an honest discussion about it. Mm-hmm. Again, I'm not against someone having a drink. Someone goes out, has a drink, that, I have no problem with that. But the amount of people that die every year from alcohol consumption, not even drunk driving anymore. I'm talking about people who abuse alcohol and die. It's it's in the hundreds of thousands of people a year, right? But again, I talk about this right now, and half the listeners are like, oh my goodness, we don't go down those roads. It's almost like these topics are taboo to talk about on either side, either the abuse side or the abstinent side. We got to find a way, Brad. My point in all that is we got to find a way to have some new conversations about alcohol, drugs, mental health, because until we do that, this is my opinion, in our society, we only do what we believe. It doesn't matter what else is around us. If we don't believe something, we won't do it. We have to start having honest dialogue about all these topics if people are ever going to be willing and courageous enough to try to get help. So what are your thoughts about what can we do to change the culture and the conversation about substance use disorder all around us?
So once again, statistics are always helpful. 14.8 million people have alcohol use disorder in the United States. 2 million have opioid use disorder. So as important as opioid use disorder is, you got to think about 14.8 million with alcohol use disorder. I think education is critical, and people need to understand there are 4 main causes of addiction. The first is genetics, your genetic profile. And we all know this kind of anecdotally. We'll say, well, the father was an alcoholic and the son is an alcoholic. And so there's absolutely a genetic predisposition to addiction for both alcohol and drugs. And you can even take a genetic test to find out if you have those propensities. So, I've taken the test, and, fortunately, I found that I was not prone to alcohol addiction or drug addiction. But, for example, it found that if I'm given cocaine, I'll have paranoia-induced cocaine seizures.
Well, that would be a problem.
Yeah. So. But the information is out there. And So I would say,
Brad, your career as a drug crime lord, Scarface style, that's probably not going to happen. See,
no,
look at
hopefully
that.
not. Hopefully
Sorry,
not.
sorry.
But,
Your Tony Montana career is
No.
going to be cut short.
No.
You're going to have to stick with eHome Counseling CEO.
Exactly. But no, really, if you can do a genetic test and you can do it on a teenager and it's just a cheek swab, and you can tell your child, look, you may go out with your friends and 5 of you may go out and all of you have a beer and the other 4 aren't impacted, but you become addicted.
Be more careful. You can
Absolutely.
you can get people to understand that genetics do matter, almost like with weight gain, weight loss, your physical health.
Absolutely.
I had one of those 23andMe tests done, and it showed that I have the genetic propensity towards late stage Alzheimer's. My grandmother died of that. So now I think to myself, okay, I can ignore the science, or I can say to myself, what can I do to guard myself from getting that one day?
Exactly.
I can sleep more. I can not have as much stress in my life. There's factors that added to my genetic propensity are going to make me more prone to wind up in a bad situation. What you're saying is we need to start getting smart with the science. And if we have these propensities, don't ignore them. Be more cautious.
Absolutely. And also be more understanding of people and understand that we're talking about a disease here. We're not talking about a moral failing. And that gets back to the whole stigma thing. So these are people who have a disease that we have to help. The second thing is trauma, and particularly childhood trauma. And so 2/3 of injecting drug users had significant childhood trauma. And there are 10 different traumas that a child can go through.
Throw out some, give some examples. People hear trauma. And
So physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, watching, a parent, domestic violence, those are all different
Alcoholism.
examples. Oh, absolutely. And so if a child is subjected to those, if you're every one of those 10 that you're subjected to, it increases your chance of addiction 2 to 4 times. If you have 6 of them, your chance of addiction is 4,700%. So, a lot of times people will say, what did you do to get addicted? When really the correct statement is what happened to you that caused you to become addicted.
yes.
And so once again, we have to understand, many of the people who become addicted are trying to overcome these traumatic experiences and that they experienced as a child. So what that says as society is we've got to try to prevent that from happening and protect our children. Because if we protect them, we're preserving them or protecting them from potentially long-term addiction. The third one is the environment that you're in. So clearly, if you're in a dysfunctional family where people drink or take drugs to deal with life, you're going to learn those behaviors yourself. And so once again, for children and teenagers, being able to remove them or show them a different role model. So for example, boys and girls clubs and things like that are critically important to help those kids and prevent them from going down that path. And then the fourth is access. And do you have access to drugs and alcohol? And unfortunately, again, as a society, we have just massively failed on this because of the whole legal opioids. A statistic that blows my mind, between 2006 and 2012, there were 76 billion opioid pills.
It's amazing.
That flooded the U.S. market. 76 billion, 38 for every man, woman, and child in the United States. And so you want to talk about access and why do we have a problem now? Well, hello, we flooded the market. And even today, you've got doctors out there prescribing opioids for things like oral surgery, which their own medical association says they shouldn't do. That acetaminophen and ibuprofen is more effective for pain relief and non-addictive, but oral surgeons are still doing it. And so, from an education standpoint, as patients, we need to be the ones to if a doctor hands you a prescription for opioids, you rip it up in front of them and say, I'm going to go to a new doctor, because they are not necessary and you can get addicted. Unfortunately, we've helped people who have been addicted from legally prescribed opioids. I'll just share one story that kind of breaks my heart. A woman who was pregnant, had a toddler. They were very excited, of course, about the pregnancy, everything else. She goes in, she has a cesarean section. Her doctor gave her 30 days of opioids for a cesarean section. And guess what happened? She got hooked. And then she's in a rehab center, and her husband is trying to take care of a newborn and a toddler while she's fighting addiction. And that was completely unnecessary. That doctor should have never prescribed that. So, we've got to educate ourselves, protect ourselves, and just stop this liberal use of opioids that many of the doctors are prescribing these days.
I think that when the history books are written on the COVID-19 pandemic of 2020, I think, my opinion, we're going to be heartbroken by the amount of people that died medically, but that we will look historically at the amount of people that died from the economic impacts and the mental health, behavioral health impacts as far more reaching and impactful than even the medical deaths. You put all of it together, it obviously has the potential to reshape America because of all these tragic ramifications. But if we continue to see unemployment at Great Depression levels, we continue to see call centers being filled with outreaches from folks that are struggling with anxiety and depression, if we continue to see this virus just out there lurking without a vaccine, without clear remedies, I think we are going to be, if we're not careful, on the verge of the greatest wave of mental health needs and the greatest amount of Americans struggling we've ever seen with anxiety, depression, substance abuse, and then deaths of despair and overdoses are going to skyrocket. So this is the moment for every person out there listening to do an inventory of their own mental health, to go to your website. What's your website right now, Brad?
eHomeCounselingGroup.com.
Okay, they can go to eHomeCounselingGroup.com. They can go to our website, ProjectOpioid.org. We have eHome Counseling, the link on our website as well. I also want to let you know that if you go to ProjectOpioid.org, we have links to other mental health services. Some people out there have insurance, some people don't. We can find you an option either way. We also have links and information on naloxone, Narcan. This is a new medication a lot of folks haven't heard of, but it's a medication that if someone struggles with opioids and they might be in danger of overdosing and dying, which can happen to someone suddenly, naloxone, Narcan, is a medicine that can save their life, bring them back from the verge of death if they're overdosing. All these resources are on ProjectOpioid.org. I think the biggest message, though, that I would give to those out there listening is look at your own mental health. Look at your own toolbox that you've created to be healthy right now. And be okay, Brad. I think you could speak to this as well. It might start with people being okay with the fact that they're not okay. I can tell you over the past 2 months, I have experienced what I can only call, for the first time in my life, anxiety and these dreams that you read articles about. People have these vivid, nightmarish type dreams. I've never had this in my life. I've experienced that some over the past couple months. I could say that's a coincidence, but I think it's this extremely unique moment. That's something that I need to take inventory of. Am I exercising enough? Am I putting myself in situations that unknowingly or needlessly increase my stress? Should I talk to one of your counselors? I mean, this is everyone out there, take an inventory of your own mental health needs and don't be afraid to talk about it. And as a leader out there, if you're a leader, listen, it's all right that we prepared for the mental health. It's all right that we prepared for the medical needs of COVID-19. It's all right that looking at the economic needs, but we need as leaders to look at the mental health needs of a society that has been broken during this COVID-19 pandemic. Leaders have to prepare to help those in need. There wasn't a lot of help out there during the best economy we ever had in 2019 when it comes to mental health issues. We got to do better.
Well, on the physical side of COVID-19, we're looking for a cure and we're looking for a vaccine. On the psychological side, we've got a cure. We can help people. And proven techniques, metrics-based, evidence-based, medication, particularly for substance use disorder, medication-assisted treatment, we have all the tools we need to help people who are struggling in this environment. They just need to reach out to us, and we can help them and prevent them from going down a path that will destroy them and their families. Once again, we see this all the time, and if you come to us early, if you come to us sooner, we can help you.
Well, Brad, thank you so much for coming in today. Again, for those that didn't hear you earlier, ehomecounseling.org.com.
ehomecounselinggroup.com.
ehomecounselinggroup.com. Brad Rex is the president of eHome Counseling Group. And if you need to seek out mental health treatment, if you're struggling with anxiety, depression, if you just want someone to talk to, and Brad, you take a lot of insurances too. So someone,
We do.
yep.
Absolutely.
So Brad might be able to help you through your insurance, and it might not cost much of anything. So, but nevertheless, reach out to us right now, projectopioid.org. We have Brad's contact information on there. We also have information on naloxone, Narcan, if you're struggling with opioids. And if you're out there and you're someone who wants to get involved in this work for those that are struggling with behavioral health issues, the opioid crisis, contact us, email us. There's room on the team for you. There's a lot of people in need, and Brad, we got to keep working to help them. We got to get beyond the stigma around these conversations and be able to look at each other and say, hey, listen, it's okay to talk about your mental health needs. It's okay to talk about that you're not feeling good, especially right now during an unprecedented time of mental health challenges during this COVID-19 pandemic. Brad, we've never seen anything like this pandemic when it comes, again, both from a medical standpoint. We all hear about that every day, but more than just the medical, the economic, societal, mental health impacts of this historic, both virus and the lockdowns that occurred because of the virus. I think we're just starting to see the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the amount of people that are going to be struggling with mental health issues, behavioral health challenges, and their anxiety and depression. Unfortunately, many of them could turn into far, far worse situations. Many of them could turn to substances, and many of them could die of things like opioids. We can't let that happen. We have to work together to get more help to those in need. Brad Rex, thank you so much for coming in, and thank you for joining us on What's the Fix. We will talk to you soon.
Thanks so much, Andre. Great to be with you today.